The Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague has issued an arbitration result in a case unilaterally brought by the Philippines against China in 2013. The issue involves a dispute between both countries over maritime jurisdiction in the South China Sea. China did not participate in the case, stating it does not accept any solution involving a third-party settlement of its territorial sovereignty or its maritime rights and interests. China has declared the award null and void and says it has no binding force. China favors bilateral talks as the appropriate way to resolve this issue. We have CCTV correspondents covering the story at The Hague and in Beijing, and we go first to The Hague to Liu Xin, who joins us now. And Liu Xin, what arbitration result did the court decide in this South China Sea dispute case?
Hi, Anand. It's a rather long ruling, a few hundred pages, but in essence, the court has ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Filipino claims. For instance, declaring that the China's 9-dot line, or the U-shaped line, which has been in existence and acknowledged by international governments since the 1940s, the tribunal has declared that this line has no basis according to international law. And the court has also decided on the maritime features, technical nature, for instance, on the technical nature of individual islands in the Nansha group of islands, which is also something which China has opposed all along. I was talking to a former judge of the International Court of Justice, Judge Koroma, who worked in the International Court of Justice, which is right behind me, for 18 years. He said, first of all, the arbitral tribunal really has no jurisdiction on a matter that concerns territorial sovereignty. So indeed, China had the right to opt out of this case. On the second hand, even if it would have been a case that is under the jurisdiction of any international arbitration, it is too much of a rush for the arbitral tribunal to decide on a case of such complexity in such a short period of time. He compared such an arbitration with a football match, saying it should not be like this. People need to have patience. People need to let emotions calm down and take their time before they can fully decide on the merit of the claim. Anand.
Now, China didn't take part in this arbitration, as we've been reporting, saying that the court has no jurisdiction. So, does the court result mean anything?
Well, the court, as China has said, before the release of the court ruling, China says this will be a piece of waste paper which only deserves in the trash can. Of course, the Western governments will use this ruling to put political pressure on China, and there will be a lot of talk in the Western media to pressure China to abide by such ruling. But indeed, as we have seen from the various reaction from the Chinese government as well as from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, China is not going to accept it. China is not going to implement such a illegal ruling in the terms of the Chinese government.
All right, thank you. That's CCTV's Liu Xin talking to us from The Hague. Now, for more reaction to the court's arbitration result, joining us from Beijing is CCTV correspondent Ho Na. What is China's reaction to the arbitration result issued by this court in The Hague?
Well, both the Chinese government and the Chinese public are reacting very strong to the ruling. China would not accept any proposition or action based on the award issued on Tuesday by the South China Sea Arbitral Tribunal, unilaterally initiated by the former Philippine government. Ministry of Foreign Affairs solemnly declares that the award is null and void and has no binding force. China neither accepts nor recognizes it. China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea shall under no circumstances be affected by the tribunal's recommendations. China opposes and would never accept any claim or action based on the disputed findings. The government has issued 2 statements saying that the Philippines has ignored the fact that territorial issues are not subject to UNCLOS, infringe upon China's right to choose its own means of dispute settlement and violated bilateral agreements that it made with China, and also violated the commitments between China and the ASEAN countries that disputes will be resolved through negotiations. And China has reiterated its stance of non-participation in and non-acceptance of the disputed arbitration. In order to uphold international legal norms, China says it will never recognize the tribunal's findings and never accept being forced into accepting them. Back to you.
Thank you. That's CCTV's Ho Na with the Chinese response to the arbitration result. And for more now, joining me from Beijing is Yi Hailin. He is the director of the Center of South Asia Studies with the Chinese Academy of Social Science. Also with us from Hong Kong is Yi Xianho. He is a professor of international law at Wuhan University. And joining us via Skype from Manila is Richard Javed Hadrian. He is an assistant professor at De La Salle University. Also with me here in the studio is Michael Swain. He is a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Welcome to all of you to the show. Yi Hailin, let me start with you. What do you make of this latest turn of events surrounding this arbitration, particularly China's response to it?
I think the arbitration, the final ruling of the arbitration tribunal is not a surprise. We already foresee what will happen, and the Chinese government has already made the response. We can notice that the nearly released statement from the Chinese government also indicate and reconfirm the Chinese stance on the South China Sea issue. We can notice that there's a two completely opposite stance for China and for the so-called arbitration tribunal. So we will see what will happen right now after this statement and the final ruling. So I think that tomorrow may be the more important day rather than today.
Okay, let's look at some of the nuts and bolts of what's been going on here. Yi Xianho, China says it rejects the arbitration result because of its failure to conform with international law. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, this failure to conform with international has two aspects. One is by the Philippines, the other is by the tribunal. We first have to understand that the dispute has to do with territorial sovereignty over some islands and reefs, in the South China Sea, specifically in the Nansha Qundao, and also maritime delimitation between the two countries. The Philippines, by filing the arbitration unilaterally, try to circumvent the essential dispute, and it first infringes upon China's right to choose its preferred means of dispute settlement, and then it violates the provisions relating to the optional acceptance declaration, and also it violates the bilateral agreements reached between the two countries to use negotiation as the means to settle disputes, and also the commitment made under the DOC, the Declaration of Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. By the tribunal, you will see that the tribunal has been doing something that usually a good professional may not like to emulate. The tribunal erroneously construed the legal effects of relevant commitment of the DOC, deliberately circumvent the exceptions that China made in its declaration, and selectively take some of the islands and reefs out of the geographical framework and delimited situation in the South China Sea. Obviously, trying to give itself some kind of jurisdiction that it did not really have, and this is very important. And then the tribunal, of course, did not respect the facts and was wrong in applying many provisions of the law. I would like to say that personally, I also have identified that the tribunal did not respect consistency in the law. It deliberately did not cite to relevant precedents that is favorable to China and not favorable to the Philippines, of course, and arbitrators who changed their views without giving any explanation, And that's really bad. And you know, in the legal profession, we think that we like to have consistency, and the tribunal and the arbitrators did not do that. And it's you know, a black spot for the legal profession. Thank you.
Okay, let me take this to Manila and get the Philippines viewpoint there. Richard, how is the Philippines government looking at this arbitration result?
Well, first of all, I'm speaking here as an independent scholar, not from a government or a specific agenda. The Philippines filed the case under Article 287, Annex 7, which allows for parties in UNCLOS to file for compulsory arbitration. China, under Article 5, Annex 7, on multiple occasions was given an opportunity to participate in the arbitration, but according to Article 9, Annex 7, the non-participation of China should not bar the proceedings from moving forward. Last October, the Permanent Court of Arbitration clarified that China's claim that it cannot exercise jurisdiction on this issue is nullified. And of course, it made it also very clear that China's resort to Article 298 to exempt itself was also nullified. There are 600 pages of explanation for that, and I suggest our good friends from China will look at that. So the verdict that came out today, without a question, was much more optimistic than the Philippines expected. I think the Philippines was expecting that it will win on certain items, but not get very definitive answer on other items. But it got favorable result on 14 out of 15 items. So in legal de jure terms, the Philippines has clearly had a clean sweep against China. But the question here is, even if this verdict is binding in accordance to Article 296 and Article 11 of Annex 7, the fact of the matter is enforcement is a big problem. So if China is not going to agree to this because China believes that it's not valid, it's null and void, then the question is, who's going to force China to enforce this? Now, most likely this job will fall upon the United States, Japan, Australia, and other countries that have expressed their interest to engage in so-called freedom of navigation operations to challenge China's supposed excessive maritime claims that this verdict has somehow nullified. But the important thing is this: the Philippine government was very subdued when it expressed the result of the verdict. Because for the Philippine government, at the end of the day, the Philippines has to negotiate with China and find a peaceful diplomatic response. So what I believe will happen in the coming days is that the Duterte administration in the Philippines is opting for a soft landing. And I think the issue here is what kind of statement the Philippine government will release. I think in the interest of reviving our long frayed ties with China, ties that used to be in its golden years just 10 years ago, the Duterte administration will decide perhaps not to release a very strong statement to condemn China, and in exchange for that, open up communication channels and find a modus vivendi with China. In fact, the Duterte administration has made it clear that it's also open joint development agreements with China. So ironically, although the verdict is very clearly in favor of the Philippines and against China, it might actually pave the way for a renaissance in Philippine-China relations, because now the Philippines believes that it has a bargaining chip when it goes into direct bilateral engagements with China.
Yi Hailin, let me get your response quickly to what Richard has been saying. He's saying there basically that this decision, this result may be binding, but it cannot be enforced. But he also adds that this might be an opportunity for China and the Philippines to move forward with this case, to negotiate this bilaterally and to come to a solution.
Firstly, I don't think there's any other country doesn't want to abide in the final solution or the final ruling. Probably there will be some country would like to take this final ruling as their legal base to launch their so-called navigation freedom operation against China. If that case happened, there will be a very serious confrontation between China and another country. So there won't be any stability in the South China Sea. In that case, there won't be any actual cooperation project in anywhere. Secondly, if Philippines want to launch the cooperation or lay down this opportunity to China to open the gate to restore the cooperation or coordination in the economy aspect or even in the maritime aspect, we should notice the one very essential point that the legal base won't be the final ruling. That means the Manila government won't take the final ruling as their bargaining chip when they discuss with China. Otherwise, there will be nothing happened, because for China it's very clear. It can't be they just take the final ruling as the bargaining chip and request such kind of a cooperation project in China is out of demand.
Right, Michael, how will the United States be looking at this arbitration result?
Well, I think the United States will probably look at this as a legal judgment that has been made, and one that the parties involved should respect and uphold. The United States position all along has been that this legal proceeding is a good aspect or a good way to proceed in dealing with the problems in the South China Sea. It doesn't see it as a panacea. It's not going to definitively solve the issue of sovereignty. In fact, the tribunal doesn't have any authority to make any judgment on the actual sovereignty of any of these features in the South China Sea. But it does provide a basis in international law for assessing what a lot of these land features are and what the implications of those judgments that it makes are for the positions of the various governments. So the U.S., I think, will be supporting all of this and these judgments in this way. The question then is, how does it proceed in its interpretation of upholding what it sees as the implications of this judgment for the parties concerned?
Right, and just to be clear on one other point, both sides, both China and the Philippines, have left the door open to bilateral negotiations to resolve this.
Oh, yes. I mean, they haven't closed the door by any means. In fact, the new president of the Philippines, Duterte, has given a greater indication of a willingness to talk with China about this. And I think it would be very wise if he took this tribunal decision as an opportunity, in fact, to not be more assertive in the sense of altering his presence or Philippine presence in the disputed areas, but in making initiatives with the Chinese to try and resume serious negotiations.
Right. Hailin, the Chinese have made the point that they're not walking away from this dispute, that they do want to resolve this dispute with the Philippines, but they believe that the way to do it is through negotiation, through consultation. So in that respect, will China now be making efforts, vigorous efforts, to resolve this bilaterally?
The ball is on the hand of the Manila, not in China. Actually, the arbitration case is raised by Philippines now, so we see the consequence, and this consequence should be handled by Philippines, not by China, unless we can override the obstacle of the arbitration case. Otherwise, I don't think it's an open gate. It only means unconditionally open gate. There is some condition. That means that there is some obstacle we should remove first. There won't be no conditional dialogue, I think, currently between China and the Philippines.
Okay, we have to take a short break right now. Richard, Javed, Hadrian, thanks for joining us. You leave us now, but we have much more to discuss with our remaining guests. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.